Hello everyone, hello one and all, and welcome to Dark Souls Part 40. Because I said so. And more importantly, it's the grand finale of my entire Dark Souls series. And I am recording this on November 12th, 1 year after my initial... Hello, Rat. 1 year after my initial upload of Dark Souls Part 1. Can you believe it's been 1 year? I can believe it because I'm not a Let's Player. So I get to get away with that. Hello, Bagchan. Still swarming with flies, I see, after 1 whole year. You must be awfully stinky. Alright, now if you remember back in Part 1, I said that this series was not going to be about technical things, like numbers, what's the proper stat spread to have for this, what, you know, is the optimized damage values for that. I said it was going to be about characterization. Because that's my background, you know, writing, storytelling, animation, cartooning, so on. Very much so centered around narratives. And I think I've actually accomplished that. I thought I did a pretty bang-up job doing that. And we told the story of many, many brick piles along the way. But I thought that we would take a trip through memory lane, not all the game, but some main areas of it, and just talk about some of the characters that we found along the way. The first, of course, is going to be Oscar, because he's the first NPC that we actually meet, and of course he's gone now, because he's hollowed out, and once we beat him again, even though this doesn't make any sense, we beat him one more time, and then he vanished out of the world permanently, which makes no sense at all, yay! But hold on, just to point this out once again, I pointed this out in my Twitch kind of part that I did last part, 38, 39. I just wanted to point out again how interesting it is to me that the cell that he ends up being slammed through has 2 doorways that seem to be going downward, either into a basement area or maybe even outside. Yet they are piled up with bricks from the inside. They didn't collapse. These bricks didn't come from the ceiling. They were brought in here and then used to pack in both of these doorways. And they were also used to pack in this doorway from the inside, which is especially strange because this wall was not always knocked down. It was knocked down whenever we made the rather silly mistake of wandering into a boulder, which we won't talk about. But it's interesting that it seems like whoever would have put down the last brick would have been trapped in here forever. But it wasn't Oscar, because Oscar was knocked through the roof. Yeah, just one of those little interesting things. But Oscar himself is interesting. Like, there are many characters in the game. There's a whole lot of characters. If you go down the NPC list, you'll notice there's just absolute tons of them. And the thing about Dark Souls is that, although there are a lot of characters, and this is also, I think, true of Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne, and Demon Souls as well, is a lot of the times that there are characters that exist, but they're not memorable. You don't remember who they are. And there are also characters that you, remember for being visually interesting, or, you know, they sound sinister or something, but other than that, you often forget about them. And one of my favorite examples of that is Vamos, who lives down in the catacombs. Pretty good example because visually he's very interesting. I mean, he's a skeleton man that makes armor and whatnot. And he has a crazy voice, but he's not really overly memorable. Even though it seems like, from the implications of the royal helm that we read off during the last part, or the part before that, that he apparently is actually fairly important within the grand scheme of the games, possibly, because of the royal helm, the implication that he has something to do with some line of royalty. But you just never think about him. He's just one of those characters. Who cares about Vamos? No one. No one really. And that's mainly just because he's just not that great of a character in the first place. I'm sure there's someone out there who's, he's my favorite character. I don't care about you, though. I'm right. I'm always right. But I would think that most people would not really think too much... Oop, missed it. That not many people would actually think too much about Vamos, of all people. And, this is kind of what I'm going to try to hit upon during this particular part. This finale. Is, what actually makes a good character in these games? There's lots of characters. There's lots of characters in, you know, Bloodborne and Dark Souls 2 and so on. I'm sure there's going to be lots of characters in Dark Souls 3. But not all of them are going to be memorable, necessarily. And why is that? You know, why is that? And it kind of comes down to me. I've given this some thought. And to me, it's because they carry some sort of human element to them. And I'll lead off into a sort of miniature story I have. My throat's still a little bit sore. I've been sort of ill lately, too. I have a little story. Whenever the Dark Souls 2 guide was coming out, German Spy asked the community, you know, contribute your questions and so forth. And although my question didn't end up being used, which I think is appropriate, and it's kind of what caps off the story in the first place. My question was to Miyazaki. Hidetaka Miyazaki, the producer of these games, except for 2, obviously. Do you feel like, in writing your characters, because I wanted it to be something that no one else would ask, in writing the characters, do you feel like, when we tried to narrow this down, it took a while to narrow down the question exactly to what I wanted. Do you feel that, when writing the characters in your games, that it's important to have some sort of Shakespearean-like flaw, some core human problem with their character that drives all of their decisions for them to be good characters? And of course that didn't get a response, which was appropriate considering that Dark Souls 2 came out, and then Bloodborne came out, and both of those games are criticized for having little to no characterization. Even though the Bloodborne voice acting is amazing. I fucking love the voice acting. The Frog Nation did an amazing job with them. Anyways, I feel like Dark Souls 1 has actually done that a little bit better than the other games have, even, you know, Demon Souls included. Especially more so than Dark Souls 2. Bloodborne has its own problems. The characterization is more, it starts, but it doesn't go anywhere. It just stops abruptly. It's kind of the problem with Bloodborne. But I feel like each of the characters that I remember, and it may not be true for you exactly, are memorable because they have some sort of human driving element to them. And with Oscar, in the case of Oscar is wandering around the asylum. He has the power to escape. Because, look here. Like, this is a message. I know these are developer messages, of course, but the implication is that Oscar left this message. So he has the power to actually leave the asylum. And, depending on what order of events that you do, then he will sometimes have the key that actually opens that door in the first place. So why didn't he leave on his own? And to me, it seems like he didn't... Well, hold on. He's running around. He's an elite knight. He's dressed in elite knight armor. He's dressed in, it's way up here. He's dressed in the elite knight armor. So obviously he's a very prestigious person, elite knight helm. He's dressed in this, an elite knight of Astora. He, obviously he's very powerful, very influential in his previous life. He's very skilled, but he doesn't leave himself. Instead, you know, his character is that he is an elite knight that ends up perishing and going hollow in an effort to free all of the weak and abandoned of society. Like all the human beings that have been rounded up and thrown away because they're seen as being too dangerous or useless. He's giving them the opportunity to prove themselves, to live a new life as hollows, you know, as undead. And whenever he actually passes out, you know, once he finally hollows out, he does seem to actually leave the world feeling fulfilled in some way. He doesn't seem to regret the fact that he was unable to fulfill the prophecy that he tells you about on his own. He's giving that to everyone else. So you have to wonder what his characterization happens, like what is his driving motivation as a person. Maybe he was driven by some sort of guilt. Maybe he was, you know, maybe he was too afraid to leave. You know, whatever it is, it's that question that makes you, you know, it's that question that makes you project yourself onto the character in your own way and try to fill in the blanks, as I've talked about my Let's Gripe about writing series, that forces you to participate in the story. And to me, that is what, you know, good writing is all about. It's about the ability to provoke the viewer, the the player, whatever it happens to be, into actively participating with the story by creating elements of the story in their own minds. And even with film, whenever you're directly narrating the plot and whatnot, that's still there, because you're still... Like, good writing in film usually involves trying to elicit the viewer into figuring things out on their own. And for some reason, these damn things will just not say anything. In this entire playthrough, for some reason, they have just never said a single thing. And I started another game recently, and they were completely fine with it. But for some reason, in this particular file, they just have never appeared. And it's so strange. I wonder if I can drop something for them, and that'll get them to... Souvenir reprisal. I can't remember if this is something they'll actually like or not. Let's test that. But I wanted to demonstrate this if possible, because I've never actually shown this off. You go to this this nest, you drop an item, and supposedly the crow tells you, you know, shiny, you know, I want shiny, I want soft, and you give them an item, and either they don't like it or they do like it. But in either case, once you leave the item, and if they do like it, then you quit out and then reload your game. Look at the number of hours on that, 114 hours. We've been a lot of work, hadn't we? And a lot of that is stuff that didn't even show up in the recording. There we go.
You, give me warm, give me soft.
And although this character is cute, well, apparently she just ate it. She ate that indictment. Maybe I had to give her the vessel of sin for her to awaken to her true nature. Vile. Vile! But you drop that, and then the item that you dropped will be switched out for something else. It's not a great system. They fixed it in Dark Souls 2. Technical improvements and whatnot. But in regards to Oscar, we don't know why he was doing what he was doing. And of course, we've talked before about what his content is, and I'm not going to get into that. But he, that was the one thing that we knew about him, that he ran around heaping the weak and abandoned. So obviously he was either noble or was trying to convince himself that he was noble. But ultimately he ends his life in much the same way that everyone else in this world seems to, through an act of violence. But regardless, he does seem to leave the world seemingly fulfilled. Now next we're going to go on to Firelink Shrine. And I did a rollback like I promised in my previous save. I went through and killed all the NPCs in my previous part. Just for the hell of it. But I did a rollback, of course, and now all the NPCs that once were living are now living once more. Unless they're assholes. And a lot of them are. So long, you sexy bird, you. Now, the next person I'm not going to talk about every single NPC in the game, obviously. I'm going to talk about ones that I kind of think about whenever I think of the game, which may upset you. How come you don't think of my favorite character? Well, maybe I'm just not going to have time to get to all of them. But I wanted to go through the ones that I felt were pretty important, or at least, memorable, or at least kind of in the area at the time. And one of those is going to be Laurentius. Now, we actually meet Laurentius, of course, down in the Lower Burg.
Oh, hello there. I'm pleased to see you safe, as always. If you provide the materials, I can...
And of course, as you know, he's a pyromancer. And, the thing about Laurentius, a lot of people love Laurentius, and they consider him to be their favorite NPC.
Goodbye then. Be safe, friend.
And usually the reason why I hear that people love Laurentius is because, he's a bro. He's a very pleasant person. He doesn't have any ulterior motives or anything. He's just a nice, well-rounded human being. Now, Laurentius can control fire. And we learn from his dialogue that he was hated for it. He was chased away by, elements of other human societies before he actually went hollow. And it's very possible that he was actually murdered in his ordinary life. Like, as a human, he may have been murdered for it. We don't know. But he became undead and journeyed his way here. And whenever he actually gives us the Pyromancer's Flame, he tells us that he is giving us a piece of himself. Like, the flame is linked a great deal with the concept of life and the soul. Like, everything is interlinked in this game's lore and setting. So, in a way, it's almost as though we're utilizing a component of him, and the kind of the point that he's trying to make is that all life is linked together. We're all supposed to care for one another. We're all supposed to support one another, because really we're all from the same source. We're all sharing the same flame. We are intertwined with Laurentius. We utilize his flame. Now, he went hollow, but he revived without losing any of his vitality. Like, he's still as human as you could possibly imagine him ever have been, having been human. He's still the same old good person that he was in life. So it's really quite remarkable, considering that his life supposedly has been so consumed with violence and hatred, that he is such a good person. Now, his story ultimately ends by us directing him down to Quilana, who is, of course, the originator of all human pyromancy once the flame was corrupted by the bed of chaos. And I wanted to point out that with Laurentius, he ends up going hollow once he does that. Like, that's the official end of his story. We can let him do nothing. Like, we can just not tell him, and he'll sit here forever, of course. But the official end of his story is that he goes hollow. A lot of people assume that he goes down there and he just fails. Like, he never actually finds her. And something I wanted to point out is that although we are using his flame, you know, his light, the part of himself that he gave to us, we actually end up accomplishing far more with it than he ever did using it himself. And in regards to how he goes hollow, there's two possible explanations. Either he did find Quilana, and he learned so much about the nature of the flame and himself and, you know, just the way that life works and so on, that it was too much for him, and he either went, you know, crazy, which I don't think is the case because he went hollow, not crazy, and there is a distinction between the two of them, or he simply lost his motivation to continue improving, and that's what drove him hollow. Or, of course, there is a more obvious explanation that he simply never found her, that he was just not good enough of a pyromancer to actually locate her on his own. But either way, that flame was his life. That was everything that he was. The flame that we carry in our hands, this piece of him, and what he now carries in him, that is everything of him. Like, his whole life was consumed by this pyromancy skill. You know, he was born into it. He was killed for it, potentially. He gives it to us. He makes it, you know, his goal in life as an undead, an unlife. And even whenever he finally goes hollow and he sort of loses his second life, as it were, it's once again because of his flame. It's because of his life. You know, the flame reflects the essence of what it means to live. Estus, you know, all that good stuff. And ultimately, it is his love of it that ends up consuming him. And that is an ongoing theme with the game, and the reason why I wanted to mention him in particular. Now, while we're here, I'll briefly talk about Griggs and lead into Logan. I wanted to mention Griggs just briefly. Of course, they're not here now, because both of them have since either left to go hollow or went crazy, and I had to put them out of their misery. But Griggs, we meet him, and there is the whole spy element. Was he a spy? Is he not a spy? It doesn't really matter. It really ultimately does not matter one way or the other. What actually matters with him is that, ooh, got a piece of ice this time. Ice water is the best. Especially whenever it's been there just long enough, yes. But Griggs was never accomplished as the master that he followed around. And his master never wanted him. And, there's something about Griggs. It seems as though he was innately mediocre in some way. That he was just never really up to snuff. Like, he just did not have the raw innate talent that other people did. Now, it's possible that, you know, he just innately was just not very good at such things. But it's also possible that he spent so much time, like he was so inertly focused on following Logan around and hero worshipping, that he never actually accomplished anything himself. Maybe the problem with him was that he spent so much time waiting on other people that he just never actually took the time to improve himself. He did admit that. He admitted his faults. He admitted that he followed Logan around because of, his own character flaw. But admitting that never changed him. Like, he never improved as a result of actually admitting to his problem, because he never put forth the effort of actually fixing it. Maybe the reason why that Griggs was the way that he was is because he spent so much time wallowing in self-pity that he just never improved as a human being. And I wanted to bring him up, not because Griggs is that memorable, but because that's something that I am always trying to bring up in my art videos. You can spend so much time hero worshipping and, just obsessing over other people. Oh, they're so great, they're so marvelous. When you could just be improving yourself and improving yourself as a person. There are so many people that get so distracted with the minutiae of everyday life and getting distracted with how other people do things that they just never seek to improve themselves. It's a very, very ordinary, common problem with people. People are very common. Like, there's ordinary people, obviously. And they are usually ordinary, not because they are just innately bad at something or because they have no innate talent. It's because they never learn to have the confidence and the motivation to actually improve themselves on their own. They have their own Logans of life that they end up chasing around. And as a result of doing that, they just never improve. And in regards to Logan himself, and I guess to this end, we can actually go back to the Duke's archives real fast. Logan himself let his career consume him. This is kind of the impression I got of him. He became famous, and he attempted to hide it, but the more that he attempted to hide it, hiding under his gigantic hat, the more it became clear exactly who he was, because he was inadvertently marketing himself, making it clear, I am Big Hat Logan. Now, Logan kept getting captured. He's a very intelligent person. You require quite a bit of intelligence to actually be able to use magic. And obviously he consumed himself with his lust for knowledge. But he was always getting captured. He was despite being so knowledgeable, he was a very, very foolish man. Very, very foolish. To me, that kind of speaks volumes that he ended up, he didn't go hollow necessarily. He may have at the very end. But he went crazy first. He followed kind of the same path that Seath took. Seath kind of lost, his own mind and his own research. And the same thing sort of happened to Logan. He sought knowledge, and the knowledge that he gained actually drove him mad. And I think it was the lack of his real humanity. His career was his life. He never really interacted that much with other human beings. He didn't really do anything with them. He just... Griggs followed him around. He wanted nothing to do with him. And I think that was key, that he just did not have the rooting of good character that it takes to actually handle what he ended up discovering. The knowledge ended up consuming him, and because the knowledge itself was insane in its own right, then he ended up taking on that trait and became insane himself because he was not able to sort of wield it. So Logan, to me, he was a highly intelligent, but he was a fool. Like, Logan, maybe more than anyone else, because of the fact that he was so accountable as a result of his knowledge, his ability to reason. He's far more accountable, and to me that makes him the biggest fool in this entire story. Because he simply just never did anything with his own gifts and his own ability. And this is a very dangerous path to walk for a lot of people. And so, as a result, his life ended in the same way that so many people in this stories do. He ended up being consumed by himself. Like his own character flaw ended up destroying himself. His lust for knowledge consumed him. And again, that's what I feel like most of the NPCs in this game that are worth remembering are like. And this is why this game is worth remembering. And that's the reason why I did this playthrough in the first place. Is because so many characters are like that. They are consumed by their own problems and end up destroying themselves as a result. Now, let's see if we can, if I can remember which... Stone Dragon. Next, I want to... Actually, he might be my favorite NPC in this game. Maybe. Love that music. Buh. But I wanted, of course, to talk about Sigmire. Now, I love Sigmire. And I think I love Sigmire. This is going to sound kind of silly, because he reminds me so much of my dad. And not because, you know, oh, I love my daddy or anything like that. My dad's an idiot. Like, he's just a certified idiot. Spends all his time listening to conspiracy radio, you know, is convinced the world's going to end at any time. He's one of those people. Sigmire is not too bright, but he considers himself to be a brave adventurer. But from everything that we've seen, he's just not a very good one. He's very strong. Like, it's very obvious. Like, anytime that he gets into a fight, he destroys anything that he comes across. So he is very powerful. But as, like, a tactician, he's not a tactician. He's not clever. And he doesn't even really seem to be that brave, exactly. Anytime, like, we first meet him on the gates of Sin's Fortress that we just passed by. And, there he just sat on the steps, doing absolutely nothing because he couldn't figure out how to get the gates open. And no matter how much time passes, he never leaves that area. And, he never attempts to correct the issue himself. He just sits there waiting, thinking, just perpetually thinking, wondering, how do I fix this problem? But he never actually attempts to do anything. And this is an ongoing problem with Sigmire. This is one of his character flaws. Is that despite the fact that he is so consumed by this need to be a brave adventurer, like, he's undead. Like, this is not his life. He's now, you know, he's erased from history, basically. But even in unlife, this is what he's trying to make of himself. But he's still not very good at it. And you have to wonder, how did he die in Katarina in the first place? It never really tells us. It just sort of alludes to a little bit that maybe he died as a result of something that he did. Like, it seemed to be the result of some form of foolishness on his part. That maybe even his daughter may have been involved. Maybe his daughter was the one that killed him in the first place. We don't know. But as we meet him, as this keeps going on, he keeps noting how we keep rescuing him and fixing all the problems himself, and he lectures us, you know, give me time to think of a plan. But he never thinks of one. He's just not very good at his job. And so, as a result, he starts to develop this fear that maybe he actually is a coward. Maybe he's actually a fool and he doesn't really realize it. And he doesn't want to admit to it, or he doesn't want to think about it, which I think is more key. And as a result of that, he tries to prove himself by, you know, almost killing himself. He actually risks his own life. And if not for the fact that we rescued him, he would have ended up getting himself killed in one less desperate attempt to prove to no one other than us, and more to the point, himself, that he is the person that he has always strived to be. Like, he wants to be a brave adventurer that is known for being powerful and heroic. But his actions have never been able to fulfill that. And so we, again, take that away from him. And there's really nothing left of him. Like, he hasn't gone hollow. He's still, quote-unquote, alive. But because we have taken that away from him, there's just nothing left of the man. That's all he is. He ends up just being a fool that doesn't realize that he's a fool, and the more that he thinks about it, the more he realizes how much of a problem he has with it. And whenever his daughter shows up to deliver the final message that Sigmar's dead wife left him, you know, that's enough to break him, whatever that message was. It wasn't clear what the message was, just that Siegelin felt like it was important to deliver that message to him. It may have also been that his wife did not go undead herself. Maybe that's what he was waiting on all this time. Maybe the knowledge that his wife did not become undead like he did and she was just gone forever. Like, she was just... there was nothing left of her. That, combined with the knowledge that he himself was sort of an empty person in his own right, was enough to drive him completely bonkers. And that's what ultimately broke him right there. You know, it's not really clear. But either way, he ends up needing to be killed by his daughter Sieglind. Maybe because he tried to turn on her, maybe because of some sort of secret between the two of them that only they knew about. Maybe he asked her. You know, we don't know. We don't know what happened. Whenever we get here, she's just staring over his dead body, and she won't say anything other than just mourning the loss of her father. But in the end, you know, as I made this analogy of a football player, an NFL star, that once they have finished their career, you know, they just have nothing left. You know, that's all that they have ever known. And once their bodies give out on them, their minds also tend to give out on them. Of course, head injuries and so forth are also linked to this. I'm not going to get into all that. But this idea that human beings are driven by their own motivations, and once they lose those motivations, then they have nothing worth living for, which is the theme of this game. That's what the whole hollowing device is supposed to represent. And with Sigmire, he really encapsulates this very well. And the fact that he is such a simple man, that is possessed by his desire to be someone that he's not, I think is one of the most real, like, human, really fucking human ways of looking at how human beings behave. So in the end, it's not really clear if he was actually a hero ever, or if he was just a fool. Maybe he was something in between. Maybe that's kind of the whole point. That, you know, despite the fact that he had all these flaws, maybe he was never meant to be a hero. Maybe he was never really meant to be a fool. Maybe he was just a man. Maybe that's how we're supposed to look at it. But it is amazing that he is survived by his human daughter. She's not undead. His human daughter, Sieglind, actually braves all of Anor Londo, up to the Duke's archives and beyond, and even discovering Ash Lake, one of the great secrets of this universe, to deliver this simple message, and to take care of family business. And I think that if there is a bright spot with Sigmire's story, it is that he is survived by such a courageous and capable person as Sieglind. Because she's a really amazing person if you think about it. Even though we have to rescue her from time to time, and guide her from time to time. So there is that bright spot for Sigmire. Now, the Fair Lady. I wanted to talk about the Fair Lady briefly. Her whole family, all of the witches, are just really... oh man, they have it rough. The Fair Lady herself sacrificed herself to help a criminal who himself has hurt a lot of people through his own inventions, creating the various mist pyromancies that ended up hurting so many other people. But the Fair Lady, despite being malformed into this spider creature, was at one point in time healthy. And she is now the way that she is because of him. So she took on the Blight Pus and ends up becoming this way. Malformed, corrupt, blind, barely able to hear. But despite all that, she's still a beautiful person. Like, she is still a very, seems to be at least, a very caring person that only wishes the best for others and doesn't ask much for herself. She doesn't blame anyone. She doesn't even really blame herself, which I think is very important. She just accepts that this is what she wanted, and to me, that's what makes her beautiful. It's that part of her character. But as a result of that, Quelaag, her sister, ends up preying on people to try to keep her sister alive, because human beings carry humanity, and this humanity, which whatever convolution is linked to this, enables her sister to keep on living. And we end up being forced to kill her without much of an explanation as a result. And we end up having to impersonate Quelaag from that point on. You know, seemingly, there's no direct dialogue for this, other than the Fair Lady or Quelan's responses. That seem to indicate that we're actually impersonating her sister and, you know, misleading her into believing that her sister is still alive, because we never actually tell her. So, my throat's really going out. And in the course of this, her sister, Quelana, who is outside, you know, right through this cave, she's almost right directly outside, she's the only one that really cleanly escapes. Like, there is one other that is, seems to have retained her original form, but, you know, either is insane or, you know, at least is consumed by some sort of infatuation with the bed of chaos. Quelana is the only one that actually cleanly escapes. But her character is that she is too much of a coward to even attempt to heal any of her sisters, or to even speak to them. She tries to hide from the world, so much so that she actually is physically invisible to anyone that does not have a strong enough link with the flame. Or there's other reasons I won't go into. And it's only whenever we actually have the power to see her that it kind of forces her to acknowledge her own guilt. But she never actually strays too far from her sisters. She just stays right there, right next to them, seemingly crippled with anxiety, crippled with the guilt that she survived, and the guilt that she's not helping them, but at the same time driven by a need to try to, you know, look after them, despite the fact that they haven't seen one another in so long. And then, of course, there's Kirk down there that I've talked about before, who may or may not have attempted to attack the fair lady for her humanity, or maybe more likely was attempting to gain humanity in an effort to heal her because of some similar regret that he encountered in his own universe. Similar to how we had to kill Quelaag. That corpse back there could have easily been us. And sort of the ongoing theme of the witches is that the witches are full of good intentions. Like, every one of them is doing something for some good intention. Quelana is out there. She wants to help her sisters. She can't. She's crippled by guilt. Crippled by, you know, survivor's guilt, too. Quelaag. Killing all these people. Because, she wants to keep her sister alive. And, Angie, of course, the criminal that kind of began it all, is sort of he's not a prisoner, but he's so consumed with his desire to protect the person that actually saved him that he has turned into a monster himself as a result. And even the fair lady herself, the reason why that this has happened to so many people, the reason why that all these people are having so many problems, is because of a rather selfish decision on her part to help this criminal. It was her good intentions and her beauty as a person that actually ended up healing him and possibly saving more people in the future, but ended up causing so many problems for so many other people. Her sister Quelaag, who ended up losing her life as a result. All the people that Quelaag ever preyed upon. Maybe even her sister Quelana, who they were never able to actually leave this area because she's now crippled. So it is the good intentions of the witches, and even the Bed of Chaos, of course, obviously, who wanted to recreate the first flame itself, that ends up causing so much misery and so much chaos, problems in the world. And I think that's really fitting for the carriers, the representatives of the soul of life. Like, the witches carry the soul of life. Not light, but life. Like life opposing death, Nito's soul. It is very fitting that the soul of life is represented by a race of people that are so driven by this need to do good or to stay true to their own convictions, but ultimately end up causing so many problems for everyone else. Which is kind of how life is. Things kind of link together in strange ways, and no matter how good your intentions, it can end up causing bad problems for other people down the line. And it's just a matter of trying to make adjustments as you live and just living, you know? So we'll leave the witches behind and all their many problems, no matter how beautiful that they are, either physically or inwardly. This is kind of what they end up leaving behind. Not as a result of really their own actions exactly. It's just, you know, this is how things go sometimes. Everything decays. Everything is ultimately consumed by the dark. And that is the ongoing thing. Remember, everyone that we've met ends up being claimed in some ways by violence. And often the reason why that they are claimed by violence is because they are driven by some noble need, like either love or compassion or something like that. It's not often that you meet someone that is just straight up just evil. Although even with someone like Lautrec, for example, and I won't go too much into him because he's really not that interesting of a character. He's just kind of funny. But even as hammy as he happens to be, he is still characterized by his love of this goddess of love that we really don't really know too much about. And even through his misconduct amongst human beings, it is driven by apparently some form of love. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the DLC once again, since we just got through with it. We can hear Go in the background. But even Go and Artorias, Kiln, Sif, and even Ornstein, and even Smoa, I guess, they're all a family of warriors. Like, you really get the impression that they're a very close-knit group. We'll leave him be. We're not going to bother him too much. That they're a family of warriors that really understand the need, or they understand ending one another nobly. Like, Artorias is killed by us, but no one holds it against us whatsoever. They actually appreciate the fact that we give him a warrior's death. Sif is the same way. Sif takes up the mantle of his former master, fights just like his former master, and even after we get the special cutscene with him, seems to go out fighting, you know, trying to give it... He's asking for a noble end, is the way that I've always looked at it. And he gives over the mantle of the things that he has protected to me, you know, to us, the player, as a result. And even though that all of them have this difference of opinion in regards to the Age of Light and even Lord Gwyn, seemingly, especially Go, they all serve a common good, and they all do it for the sake of others. And Kieran, you know, of course, we barely know anything about her at all. She's an assassin. And she ends up laying down her arms as a result of this realization of her love of Artorias. And the death of him, it seems to be what puts an end to her career. Like, she just gives up after that point. Gives over her weapons and gives up fighting. And all of them actually seem to give up fighting in some form. Artorias the least, I suppose, because he actually goes out fighting, although he attempts to surrender in his own way by succumbing to us. Go, of course, literally has given up fighting entirely. He's given up conflict entirely and is focused inwardly on trying to improve himself. And again, I'm not going to go too much into that because I've gone into it very recently. Kieran gives it up. Gives up fighting entirely, of course. Sif, in his own way, gives up fighting entirely. By seeing us, recognizing us, knowing what we are after, and giving up his life through combat, but ultimately handing over the mantle and just succumbing in his own way. Which, similar to Sigmire, fighting is all of their lives. Like, that's all they were. And whenever each one of them ends up laying down their arms, finally, they either die or end up just vanishing from history entirely. And so in that same way, that common thread between the characters, they either go out through an act of violence, or they go out through some act of love, or they are forgotten, they vanish from history. Because, as Go says, the dark ends up claiming us all, in some ways. The dark will eventually win, no matter what. Now, I think that's enough in regards to the NPCs. Let's return to the Firelink Shrine. Because there is only one thing left to do. We've accomplished everything that we're going to accomplish in the world. We've done everything that we need to unlock the final path forward to face Lord Gwyn, or as far as we know, to succeed him. Because Frampt and Kath have both given us two completely different reasons for why we need to do what we do. Frampt told us that we are to succeed Lord Gwyn, as though Lord Gwyn himself no longer exists. Kath, on the other hand, has told us that that is not necessarily a lie, but that is a half-truth, in that it is our goal to become the next Dark Lord. Because there actually was a fourth Lord Soul that we were not told about, the Dark Soul. And that is what humans carry. And I've been over this before. Witches carry the Soul of Life. Nito carries the Soul of Death, and seemingly only Nito, although the skeletons that run around may or may not have it. The Soul of Light, not life, but light, is carried by the quote-unquote gods, which you might call greater humans or something. And human beings themselves carry the Dark Soul. And we're going to offer some aspect of all those souls to the Lord Vessel. And that will open our way. So the way to the Kiln is finally open. The actual path to the Kiln, by the way, you notice that the doors themselves, once they're open, seem to be inscribed with some sort of runes and signifying some form of magic that was used to seal them in the first place. Pretty interesting. But you'll notice that the path to the Kiln, of course, is covered up in the Black Knights. Whether they are souls, whether they are images of who they used to be, we don't really know. It's really not clear what exactly they are. But it is interesting that they are all going left to right and vanishing into the light. And the light itself is interesting because it is not dark. Like, this is not... Anytime that we have encountered a very deep place, like within the depths of creation itself, we have seen that it has been completely dark. It has been the abyss. It has been the place, like in the opening cinematic, in which the first flame was first discovered by the pygmies that ended up becoming the 4 different subclasses of humans. But this place, however, is completely consumed in white. I wonder what happens if I try to walk off. Probably die. Yeah, let's not let's not do that. And I really don't know what exactly this means, other than perhaps that maybe the Kiln is actually constrained within its own dimension, or its own sort of pocket area of reality. And this thing that we're walking across does not really exist in a literal sense, but we're walking across this complete, total whiteness, because this is signifying creation in some way. That maybe what we're actually walking through is whatever is radiating out from the Kiln and the flame itself in the first place, that is giving rise to the world that we consider ourselves to live in the first place. But again, very interesting that these knights are just slowly making their way to nowhere, possibly merging from one dimension into another, possibly phasing in and out of creation itself. Maybe they never existed in the first place, we don't know. But again, as I've said many times, especially with Eastern storytelling, sometimes it's not supposed to be literal. Sometimes it's just supposed to convey emotion. It's supposed to convey an idea, a sensation. And as you walk past these steps, think about the sensation that it actually brings you. Do you get a sense of wonder, mystery, danger, perhaps, at the idea that these things may actually come alive and attack you? You're supposed to be feeling all these things as you move forward into this final area, which is completely darkened until we get nearer and nearer to it, the only thing that is dark. Then we finally emerge into it. The kiln of the first flame. The first flame itself is the originator of everything, as far as we know. Because as the opening cinematic tells us, whether it is completely true or false, in the beginning there was nothing except for gray lands. There were stone dragons that were simply stone. They were basically just the embodiment of non-creation. They didn't seem to have motivations, they didn't seem to have goals, they had no culture, no civilization. And there was nothing except for mindless, pygmies, creatures that seemingly did not have life, death, light or dark until the flame, seemingly magically out of nowhere, appeared for, I guess, plot reasons. And as a result, we now have everything that we have now. We have life, we have death, we have the light, and we have the dark. And you'll notice that in this area, all these structures, all these little columns, things that used to... Apparently this used to be something that was constructed specifically to contain this flame. And it is interesting that all of it seems to have melted in a very specific pattern. Like, all of it is going this direction. And as we get closer and closer to the center, you'll notice that it actually starts to veer off in, like, this direction that I'm walking now. Instead of going this direction, it starts to circle. So, all of this seems to have been melted away by the sheer power of the flame itself, whenever it was burning at its brightness. It actually... I imagine that the kiln is sealed away from the rest of everything because of that reason. Because, it otherwise may end up consuming the entire world. We don't know. But the fire seems to have swirled like a tornado of power around the entire area, melting even stone itself, and completely destroying anything that used to be a structure, a man-made structure, or a god-made structure in this case. And all that's left is what you see here. Which sort of tells you that maybe this place was built during a time in which the flame was not as strong as it is. That maybe they built this place whenever the flame was starting to wane. And Gwyn did not arrive until a little bit later after the construction was finished. And once he actually nodded himself that maybe that's what ended up consuming this entire area. That's my best guess. But even the ground itself, this is not snow, it's just straight up this ash. And notice, now we have Black Knights. Not Silver Knights. And as I pointed out before, there are two different explanations as to what exactly the Black Knights are. And one of them is that they are Silver Knights that were consumed by the flames of the Beta Chaos, and the other is that they are beings that were consumed by the flames of the kiln itself, and both of those are true. The clarification is that the flames of the Beta Chaos are what consumed their armor and made them black, and transformed them. The flames of the kiln, once Gwyn rekindled himself, are what destroyed their bodies. So these don't actually have any bodies, they're just walking suits of armor at this point. And if you don't have them by now... Oh, it's not going to drop one of them. But they drop the Black Knight weapons, all of them. So if you are missing some of them, you can get them here, finally. A little bit late. So the ones that you actually meet out in the world are your chance to get some overpowered weapons if you're lucky enough early on. But otherwise, this is where you actually get them. This is also where we're going to get their armor. And let's demonstrate the amazing combat system in this game. Oh yeah, let's solve everything through backstab fishing. What an amazing combat system. And not gonna complain too much about that right now, though. But again, as we get nearer to the kiln, we have to wonder. One, I know, we all know what we're going to find there because we played the game. But whenever you're first playing it, you really don't know what exactly you're going to find. You're going to assume that since it's a video game, there's going to be a final boss of some kind. So you might actually assume it's Gwen. But as far as our character knows, Gwen either does not exist or will welcome us with open arms and say, "Here, you take up the mantle. You are now the Lord of Flame," or something to that extent. We don't know. And we'll briefly stop to look around. So we're really not confronted with much of a question of what to do until the very, very, very end of the game, which makes the sudden decision far more difficult. And it is interesting that this area has such a framework about it. Like, usually whenever you see things like this, it's because of some kind of aqueduct system. But it doesn't seem like anyone has lived here, and it doesn't seem to be a place where people are really meant to live. I really wish that we could get up there. Like, I really wish that we had to have gone around and actually ascended all the way up to the very top, and that's where the final fight would have been. But we can't have everything, I suppose. And you'll notice there in the distance that the spires from the heat are actually going that direction now. What exactly, like, these giant arches were, I don't really know. Really interesting. But the discoloration that you see there, I imagine, is from the heat itself. That maybe actually this is the result of it being... I don't know. They probably referenced something that I don't know specifically about. But maybe it's because it's been turned into iron because of the congestion or something. Maybe it's just been forged down into it or something. Or maybe this is just a natural reaction that I'm not used to seeing. But that discoloration is very obviously a heat-related thing. A lot of people run through this area. Don't notice the terrible texturing over here. It's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. Especially this part. It's pretty rough. But it's still fine. So yeah, this place is utterly destroyed. Nothing is left. Whatever this place used to be, and again, this is one of the common themes of this game, it looks like it used to be completely majestic. It used to be an incredibly beautiful area. And even in its decay, it's still a beautiful area in its own way. But it is decayed, and no one is left to actually see it. And as we get closer to this final little area, I'll talk about the last NPC that I want to actually discuss, and that is Solaire. I, of course, need to talk about Solaire, not because of memes or anything like that. And this is the last drop that we're going to get in the game that has been actually handed to us by the developers, and it's going to be the Black Knight armor itself. Odd that you get it so late in the game. So incredibly late in the game. I actually considered cheating it in. But decided against it because I was going to get it here, and I thought that it'd be mildly fitting. Now, let's read this all before we go into Solaire, I guess. But I did want to talk about Solaire mainly because I think that he also sums up the game in a pretty good way. Alright. Black Knight Helm. Are you guys gonna miss this, me reading off descriptions? Don't worry, I'm sure when Dark Souls 3 comes out, I'm not gonna do a Let's Play of it. I might eventually, I have no idea. It depends on how good or bad it ends up being, which I kind of fear for it for various reasons. It'll be a good game, but I don't know if it'll carry the same sort of narrative weight that I value so much in the Souls games. But I'll probably end up playing Dark Souls 3 on Twitch whenever I have it. So you don't have to worry about it too much. But for the time being, I guess this is going to be the last description I ever read out. Black Knight Helm. Helm of the Black Knights who haunt Lordran. Who haunt it. Carry over from the days of which, in early development, Miyazaki wanted the knights to roam around. But due to technical limitations, he couldn't really pull that off, unfortunately. The knights followed Lord Gwyn when he departed to link the fire. But they were burned to ashes in the newly kindled flame, which is what I was talking about before. Wandering the world as disembodied spirits ever after. So it could be that the spirits that we saw out there are actually what this is referring to, or they could be referring to it a bit more, less literally, and discussing the ones that we've actually been fighting outside. That maybe they have wandered outside of the kiln somehow. Don't ask me how they got through the doors. And have been appearing in Lordran ever since, as specters in a way. As memories of what the world used to be. Oh, thank God. I was so worried about this. This is the first time I've ever actually gotten this to work. It took so many reloads to get him to work correctly. But the last guy that we're going to talk about is Solaire. Now, Solaire... And I don't even know if I want to summon Solaire or not. I think I do, because honestly, the final boss fight is kind of trivial in its own way. And I'm going to talk about that some too. But I guess it's kind of appropriate in a way. So let's bring in Solaire one last time. But Solaire here, his motivations are really steeped in, not really mystery, they're just very convoluted in his own right. Here they help us one last time. Now, we can't really understand his motivations. And maybe even Solaire himself doesn't really understand his own motivations. Because the only thing that really ever tells us, and his eyes look so sad right now, is that he is looking for his own personal son. Whatever that means exactly, we never know. It's not really meant to be literal. It's impossible for us to help Solaire, because we don't really understand what it is that he's looking for. And because the struggle that he's facing doesn't really seem to be, although he seems to be, in a way, looking for something that is tangible. It seems more to me that he's looking for something that's actually internal. Like he's going through some sort of internal struggle that he won't tell us about. And what exactly that is, we don't know. But I sort of get the impression that maybe Solaire, in some way, hates himself in some respects. I've gone over this before, but he seems to value light. Like there's no sun here. And I guess technically there's no sun in Lordran either. But whenever he's looking up at it, he describes it in such a way that it seems to be less a literal sun that he's looking up towards, and more a representation of all the noble qualities that he values in life. And you remember that his adorable little descriptions that we got from his armor and whatnot, where it actually says that the emblems that are on his shield and armor are drawn by him himself. Which you can kind of ridicule that in any way that you want to. But to me, in a sort of a narrative sense, the fact that he has to draw those things himself is sort of metaphorical for the idea that those things do not intrinsically exist in the world themselves. And maybe that's what he's actually looking for. Like, he has to physically create this emblem of the sun in the same way that he has to physically go out and find goodness in the world, and maybe goodness in himself. That's what I've always subscribed to him. You can always... Like, I really hate the brain-dead notion of that he's just looking for the sunlit maggot, and oh, he found the sunlit maggot, he found his son, and that's as far as it goes. That to me is ridiculous. It's far more meaningful to me to go with the idea that he's reaching for humanity in a way that we don't do so literally. That he is on a quest to discover himself and discover everything that is good about people in general. Always love that jump. What a fucking badass. Good job beating that hit right in your fucking face, Solaire. You're a real champ. Just don't fall off the edge. But even though he might or may not hate himself, or he might despise people in some way or something, maybe that's not true at all, but either way, he does seem to have this deep inward struggle with himself. And he does say of other people that he worries that they might consider him to be a fool. Like, if he has any major fear in life, it is that people would consider him to be a laughingstock, and he says that literally. So in some ways he does seem to fear other people, and he seems to fear himself. In the same way that a lot of people do, like in our own personal struggles and our own attempts to be the people that we want ourselves to be, we do, in a way, fear ourselves and fear what other people will think of us. And to me, he embodies all that. The lightning is not so much metaphorical, though. It's just lightning. And a kill is just a kill. But even in that context of either fearing others or hating himself or whatever, he still loves us, the player. Loves us unconditionally. We've never had to do really anything for him to earn his trust or acceptance. And he does that with seemingly everyone that he meets. Even with his relations with NPCs. NPCs don't really talk about him too much, I suppose. But even then, he seems to have generally good associations with people. So he seems to be that way with everyone that he meets. So, in trying to find his own son, maybe that's what that entails. He's trying desperately to be a good person. To be a good, noble person that seeks to help others. Even here. Like, he is, in his own world, has fought his way to the Kiln. And is now helping me in this, this late hour. And in the context of the story, Miyazaki actually said that he considered his ending in the hallway, where we find him going insane, to be his good ending, because he considered it to be finally finding his own son, which to me kind of goes hand in hand with the whole maggot thing. I know I'm disagreeing with the developer on this one, but I think that's really dumb. I think this is his good ending, because this is as much of his son as he can ever transform into. Actually setting himself ablaze to ensure that there's life for generations to come is probably the greatest act of goodness that he could ever perform. So to me, this would be his good end. And the idea of him actually finding the maggot and that being his son being a good end, to me, is ridiculous. I don't agree with that one iota. And the more I learn about Miyazaki, I really don't know if he really understands. Like, it's fitting that he did not answer that question that I referenced earlier, because I don't know if he really understands it exactly. I'm not saying that he's a bad writer, just that he's not as amazing as people have assumed that he must be, given the quality of seemingly the quality of the writing in Dark Souls 1. And Solaire, I think, kind of encapsulates that. Because although he is as amazing as he is, because we ascribe all these things to him, that may just be the result of the way that the game is written. Because even Miyazaki doesn't really even seem to understand his character exactly, or is misrepresenting him, or, is not really following through, poor sad eyes, following through with his character as much as he could have. But regardless, Solaire here is willing to accept being a fool, becoming a fool, that he's feared, in order to gain his quote-unquote goal. But in the process of us preventing that, seemingly, like, we actually deny him the sunlit maggot that actually helps him, or, quote-unquote helps him, that drives him to become insane, he ends up becoming a hero here. Like, this is as much of a hero, I guess, as you can possibly be in this world. And it's kind of thanks to us. So I don't know if he's really... I really don't know if he's that much of a hero, exactly. It's difficult to say. Is he that good of a person because he's actually striving to be one? Like, does actually striving to be a good person actually make you a good person? I don't know. I don't know. But for his, I guess, official end of ending his life in the hall, with the, and by the way, I don't remember if I ever mentioned this, but you can actually see the number of humanities that are required to open that path up on the walls. You can actually see little indentions in the wall where human souls are meant to be stored. And the fact that they're indented is really creepy. Amigara Fault, is that the name of it? Can't remember what its name is exactly. But it looks like one of those things. Really kind of creepy in a way. But a little interesting little detail. But his official end there does end the same way that all the other NPCs seem to end. That he ends up dying through some act of violence because he was seeking out goodness. And I'll actually have decided to read one last thing. But I'll do that after this boss fight. Alright, come on, Solaire. Come on with your sad, pretty eyes. This is the last thing that we need to do, buddy. He's not even looking at me. Poor Solaire. What's he even thinking? He's just looking down. He's probably thinking more about what he's going to do in his own world. Because once he's done here, we will be done. Like, he doesn't know what we're going to do, and it's never really been important to him. He just wanted to help, to try to be as good of a person as he could have been. But maybe he never lived up to that potential in the way that he saw that he should have. Maybe in our eyes he did, but again, his problem is one that we can't help with. The only thing we can do is summon him to our world and enable him to help us. Now, Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. A lot of people lament that he is an easy final boss, but if you do not parry him, this is where this comes from. If you don't physically parry Gwyn, then he is a huge badass. Like, even if you abuse your shield, then he is still very much so incredibly aggressive and very dangerous. Like, he can overpower you pretty easily. And even I was trying not to... I can actually let Solaire die, so it's not a big a deal. I was trying to parry him at least once. Maybe I can save Solaire here. Man, he's really being aggressive towards Solaire. Well, Solaire dies and he dies. Don't kill him, Solaire. Don't kill him. Oh, he killed him. But you'll notice that Gwyn's face is that of a hollow. And it's not because he's undead, it's because his soul is missing. Oh yeah, his, this one. This is the one I forgot about. Alright, farewell, Solaire. You've been good to us. Hope you find whatever it is that you need to find. Alright, we'll read 2 more things, and then that'll be the last item description I ever read. But Gwyn himself is pretty easy, obviously, if you summon in help. And he's pretty easy if you just parry fish him and then keep riposting him over and again. But especially if you're using, say, like a two-handed build in which you're rolling primarily to negate damage, he's a big problem. Like, he actually will kick your ass up and down. And I'm sure a lot of people that have actually taken up challenge runs can attest to this. He's actually quite dangerous. And we'll kind of briefly take a look around in this area, this general area. You notice this area, this whole path, and these little things seem to be, is it stalactites or stalagmites? I think these are mites. That seem to have been things that formed from particulate matter actually dropping in after the whole area has been incinerated. It is interesting that... Are they actually lined? No, they're not perfectly lined. These 3 are. But this one isn't. This is unusual. But there's 4 different little curled up columns like this, but one of them is set apart from the others. Maybe it's supposed to represent the Dark Soul. I don't know. Never really noticed it before. But you'll notice the way that the sand, not the sand, the ash radiates away from this last bonfire that we can actually kindle. And by the way, I don't know if I ever pointed this out. This is not a sword that's actually stuck in here. I mean, like, these are... They use the same model, so this is, I guess, is not really... They use the same model to make sure that the player can see it and recognize what it is. Because our instinct is to immediately go over and light it, right? But again, the bones of an undead, which probably in this case are really not supposed to exist. They're just using the same model. But this is actually not a sword, it's a stake. It's used for poking flames and embers. A lot of you guys won't know what it looks like, though, because you've never had to use a wood stove. Back when I was a kid, we used a wood stove in our old house, and it got very, very cold all the time. And I had to chop a lot of wood and carry a lot of wood in, and it was very, very miserable. Interesting that flames continue to burn here, with seemingly nothing actually to consume. Pretty interesting. The actual interior of this place seems to be a great dome which would be appropriate for something that is meant to direct heat, or direct power in this case. Because the flame that we see is not exactly flame, it's estus, like it's the essence of, you know, all life. What is this exactly? This almost looks like a grating for like a sluice or something. Interesting. Makes you wonder what exactly this place used to be and what their intended purpose for it actually was. Maybe this is something that is meant to direct heat or capture heat or let heat in and out. I don't know. But you would think that maybe at some point, once the fire started to die down, then they would start building things to try to manage the flame, because they started to worry, hey, it's starting to die down for some reason. We're actually losing sunlight, and we're having to construct illusions in order to maintain the illusion that everything is as bright and marvelous as it used to be. So maybe that's what's going on. But everything in here, I don't know, all this rock especially is confusing. I kind of imagine the flame used to be here, like it was always here, and this is where it was discovered in the first place. And it's just that everything was built around it. So maybe that's the reason why there isn't really a floor here. It's not like a paved floor that they brought the flame in and put it in the middle or anything. So I guess they just built everything around it, if I had to guess. Not many people actually spend the time to walk around and look at everything in here. And I don't think that's writing or anything. But there's really not a whole lot to look at in here, other than the fact that it seemingly is a natural place that had an organized structure built around it for the purposes of managing the flame. And it was consumed whenever Gwyn kindled himself. And just to make it clear what exactly he did, he's not undead. He's not going hollow in the way that we have considered it. He was transforming back into a pygmy. Like, he wasn't just insane. A lot of people say that he sees you and instantly attacks because, you know, he's either trying to test you or because he wants to prevent you from rekindling the flame. I think he has kind of lost his mind in the same way that hollows and undead happen to. And that is because what gives us sapience and what gives us reason is our own soul. And if you lose that, then you lose your sapience, you lose your reason. And with Gwyn, he was not going undead. I've explained this in length in the past. But the way that the souls work, I'll briefly go over this, because this is the final episode, I've got to summarize this. The life soul is linked with life, you know, obviously. Fire represents it. It represents everything that is sort of linked together, flowing, evolving, springing forth from creation. The death soul is the inverse of that. It represents the ending of that, and what it means for that to end. And even Nito, it seems like Nito exists as a corporeal being, but he's not even really alive exactly. And it's not even clear if Nito was ever actually a pygmy, or maybe is a congregation that just so happened to gain the powers that Lord Soul once the other ones did. And the Dark Soul that we hold is, as I've gone over before, linked with physicality. It's linked with everything that is matter in the world. Like, you know, just straight up just matter. You know, it's linked with that. The Light Soul is sort of everything that is not that. It's what is natural to us. It is the nature of being a person. You know, the soul itself. It seems to be what that's linked with. It's the brilliance of life itself. Like if the life soul was the fire, the light soul would be the light from that fire. And if the by that token, if the death soul is the absence of flame, then the dark soul would be the result of that absence. That's how all the souls work together. And as I've gone over before, after we got through with the DLC, interesting lighting around here, by the way. they're not all necessarily segregated from one another. There seems to be a bit of bleed over. Like some of the pyromancies, for example, seem to have some relationship with sorceries. So it does seem like, since sorceries are linked with the soul, and pyromancies are linked with life, and so on, and even there's some pyromancies that are actually something that Nito uses. I don't know if I even have it with me right now. Should. Yeah, Gravelord Sword Dance. That even in this case, Nito, despite not being a god, has his own miracles. So there's quite a bit of bleed over from one to the other. Maybe they're all sort of the same thing. It's just that we quantify them and organize them in different ways. So keep that in mind, that all these souls are in their own way linked together. They're all aspects of the same fire. The first flame. This is one of the points that the game is trying to make to us. And let's find Lord Gwyn's soul and read that off. And that'll be next to the last thing that we ever do. Soul of Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, Lord of Sunlight. And Cinder. Because he's now the Lord of Cinder, because he is no longer the Lord of Sunlight, because he's faded. And he's faded because, as I said, he's not undead. He's not really going hollow exactly. He's burning his soul away. Like he's burning his very soul, his Lord's soul, in order to keep this flame lit. And as a result, since he is losing his soul to the first flame, that is actually causing him to quote-unquote hollow. Like human beings hollow because they are undead. So as the strength of the light soul diminishes, because the strength of the flame diminishes, and it exhibits less light, and therefore the strength of the dark soul increases, then the power of the dark soul manifests itself in that it actually, as I said, it's linked with physicality, remember? It causes your body to reform inside of Estus, inside your home. Your home is the fire, the flame, the bonfires. Estus itself. It reforms your body, and in that effect, it makes you quote-unquote undead. Even though you die, your soul returns to the flame, and the dark soul has gained enough power to reform your body and transform you back into yourself, which makes you sort of immortal in a way. And what the undead curse actually is that because of that, even though you're getting your body back over and over and over again, you're actually doing sort of the same thing that happened to Lord Gwyn. That you're slowly losing little bits of your soul, what makes you over time, to the point that all that's going to be left is going to be a hollow shell. And that's why it's called hollowing. So you do it via the power of the dark soul. Because as the dark soul's power increase, so does the elements of physicality in the universe. And with Lord Gwyn bequeathed most of his power to the gods. Remember, he split his power up to the four kings and even to Seath, and apparently to the other gods as well, and burned to cinder for the first flame. But even so, Lord Gwyn's soul is a powerful thing indeed. Think about that. His soul, the soul of Seath, which is not really his soul. It's actually a shard of Lord Gwyn's soul. Seath doesn't have a soul. He's a fucking dragon, which that's been retconned up and down. We took that. We took the four king souls. So that's two pieces of Lord Gwyn's soul. And then we took the bed of Chaos's soul. And Nito's soul. The death soul. So we took the death soul. We took the life soul. And we took two shards of Gwyn's soul. This little bitty shards. And that was enough to count for 4 different major Lord souls. That's how strong Lord Gwyn used to be. He was insanely powerful. Which gives you an idea of just how strong a Dark Lord could be. So, what was I even saying about this? Yeah, he let himself to be consumed. That's how strong he was. just using shards of his soul was enough. Because obviously we're not going to use the Dark Soul, because we're the ones that have the Dark Soul. The Manus thing didn't even exist at the time, so I guess that was their rationalization for it. And even now, he gave up all his power to the gods. Like, he split his soul. Like, that's how... Think it this way. This is something I wanted to bring up. I'm glad I was rambling, because it made me remember. Imagine this thing just sitting here in the middle of nowhere. When out of nowhere, like, pretend I'm like the pygmies, and there's just a group of wandering, mindless pygmies, what you might consider to be hollows, wandering around, and they see this. And they all stumble in towards the flame. But they all seem to have gotten their Lord Souls at the same time, and there are 4 aspects from the first flame. So it seems like that maybe the furtive pygmy, Gwen, Nito, and the Witch of Isleth, who apparently hates names. That's a joke I made back in part 1. Doesn't believe in names. May have been part of the same exact group or tribe or whatever you want to call it that actually wandered in. They, for all we know, they could have been related to one another if there was such a thing as birth and death during those times, which we also don't know. So it's interesting that they would have been actually that closely related to one another during that time, that they would have picked up these aspects and actually turned against one another in the end, in their own ways. Pretty interesting. So we get the option of linking the fire here. But the option that the game does not tell you is that we also have the option of leaving. And again, this happens so quickly that a lot of people will just absentmindedly link the flame without even realizing it. Which in its own way is sort of a narrative point that you were tricked into coming here, and you were sort of proceeding on with your own goals, and you didn't even realize what you had done until it was too late. And the other option, of course, is rather than linking the flame, we can simply walk away. It's interesting that the other option is not to really do anything, is to not do something. Like, we've destroyed Gwen for seemingly really no reason. We could have just done nothing at all, and let sort of nature take its course, and just gone about our business, and maybe the same exact thing would have happened. But forgive me, this is going to take a while to explain. But remember back to Frampt and Kath. Like, why are they doing what they're doing? Why is Frampt doing what he wants to do? Like, why is he so intent on keeping the Age of Fire going? We don't know. We really don't know. Why is Kath so intent on keeping everything going as it's going? We really don't know. The only thing that people have really surmised is maybe they're related to the dragons in some weird way, so either they are trying to get revenge in some convoluted way or something else. We really don't know. But it is important to know that Kath actually instructs us on what happens in his own way whenever things kind of go to shit. Like, the best way of doing this is to look at the Dark Race hand. Because remember what happened... Remember what happened in Dulando? They all turned on one another. And the Dark Race needed to be sealed up by Ingrid. Thanks, Ingrid. I know I didn't talk about you because your characterization isn't that magnificent, but I still like you. You're still a little sweetie bun. But the Dark Race arose because they were taught how to actually absorb humanity from other human beings. So, think about what we are doing. Like, whenever we are invading other worlds and being invaded, it's because, like, Darkwraith Kirk, for example, it's because they are trying to take our humanity, or we are trying to take humanity from them, right? So, why are we doing this? Because the more humanity we have, the longer we can stave off hollowing. Because humanity, you know, is an aspect of our own dark soul. So the more that we actually have, the more we can maintain our sanity, even if we die. Like, whenever we die, we come back, you know, hollowed a little bit. And we can use the humanity to restore our human form completely. And that's what keeps us sane. So imagine a world in which this, like, the flame has gone out permanently. And there's just no first flame anymore. Like, this is all gone. All of it has vanished. And it is now inaccessible. So it is just permanently dark. Because I've pointed out in the past, there is no cycle in terms of Dark Souls 1. There's only the fire that's eventually going to go out, because as far as the game is concerned, it will eventually go out, and then that'll be it. Because as Ghost says, the dark will eventually win. Because that is the nature of life itself. It burns, but it can't burn forever. It eventually goes out. Like, Dark Souls 2 never happened. And they need to keep making sequels, and they have to keep using the Dark Souls name, because, like, you know, there's games like Titan Souls, right? You can't just say something Souls and say, well, this is our marketing thing. They have to protect their own IP, so they have to keep using the Dark Souls universe over and over again. Which is why I'm saying whenever Dark Souls 3 comes out and you're wondering how does this fit together with Dark Souls 1, it doesn't. It doesn't fit together with 2, 2 doesn't fit together with 1, don't worry about it. I look at it from the perspective of they're like Zelda games. They just keep reusing the same elements over and over again. Just don't worry about it too much. Just consider Dark Souls 3 and all the things it's going to retcon and reinvent and mistakenly think about and blah, blah, blah. It's just that it's contained to its own universe. So even though you might see stone dragons in 3, they don't exist in Dark Souls 1 anymore. We killed the last of them. Even though people won't use humanities anymore in Dark Souls 3, that doesn't mean that something happened that caused that to stop. It's just because it's a different game. And it's basically a different universe, even though they might reference things from this game for the hell of it. Because again, that's just how Miyazaki is, and that's how Eastern storytelling happens to be sometimes. But anyways, the choice between all this. Imagine a world in which Kath was right. Because this is eventually going to happen. It has to happen. The world descends in the darkness. All this pretty little light completely vanishes from the world. And we are left in an era of darkness. In which, like, gods are immortal until they're killed, seemingly. Like, you have to physically murder them in order to keep them from living. The only exception might be like Gwyn, and that's just because he was burning his own soul. And even then, he wasn't really dying. He was just reverting back to being a mindless pygmy. And Nito, of course, is not really going to die unless someone kills him, quote-unquote kills him. Whether we killed him or not, I have no idea. That doesn't make any sense. The witches seem to be immortal in the same way the gods are. You have to physically murder them. And, so life would kind of continue to go on unless you start killing things. And there's nothing to say that human beings can't keep having kids during a dark age. Like maybe the birth rate would decline or something crazy. Because the power of life and light has been diminished. Maybe culture and things like that would naturally be diminished as well. We don't know. You have to wonder what exactly would happen during a dark age. Because that is the choice that we're faced. Do we keep doing what we're doing now? Or do we institute a new dark age? And what would that actually entail? Because if there was a dark age, the undead curse would not go away. Like, that's the one thing that we know would happen if we relit. The undead curse would vanish because the power of the light soul would be returned. And because of that, the power of the dark soul would be diminished, and so as a result, the authority that the dark soul has over physicality would be diminished as well, which means that we would not reform as easily. And maybe not at all. So the undead curse would simply not exist for a time until it began waning again after about 1,000 years or so. Or less, considering how not really powerful we are as a simple human being. But, during that time, if everyone was becoming undead, like all of humanity was becoming undead, like no one was dying and staying dead at that point, it wouldn't matter if people were still having kids. Like, there's nothing to say that if we don't light the fire, people can have children anymore or anything. It doesn't mean everyone's going to go extinct. But there will be so many undead wandering all of creation that inevitably it wouldn't matter. The undead would far, far outnumber the living at some point. There's not enough undead asylums to store everyone. So eventually, all the gods, the witches, and humanity would go extinct because they would simply be overrun with undead, if you think about it. And because, undead aren't really going to have kids with one another, as far as we know. I couldn't possibly imagine. That means that it basically would cause people to start turning on themselves, like what's been happening in Lordran. Lordran was a preview. Like our need to invade other people, what Kath was telling us, and why he kind of, in a way, created the Dark Race himself, is because he foresees this. This is going to happen. Like, there's no debating that. You can keep throwing people at the flame, but with each new generation, the power of that person is going to be weaker and weaker and weaker, until there's no way that you're going to be able to upkeep it, whether it takes 100,000 years or another 100 years. We don't know. So eventually people are going to start turning on themselves. Human beings are going to start, murdering gods to absorb their sort of generic soul power that they have. They're going to be absorbing humanity, like my 99 self-humanity up there, my lovely self-humanity. People will try to absorb that from one another in an effort to prolong their own lives. So it'll end up becoming this dark world where only the very strongest people are able to survive. Because people will start turning on themselves, and only the incredibly powerful will be able to defend themselves against these pygmy creatures. But that's not to say that this will result in some sort of Highlander scenario, where there's only one person left alive that holds all the souls of everyone that has ever existed. Although it's possible, maybe it's like a Big Bang, Big Crunch thing. That maybe eventually it'll be that there will be one Dark Lord that reigns over a completely empty and barren wasteland of creation, and at that point, he burns as a new First Flame in some way, and it restarts everything. We don't know. Maybe that's what happens. Or it could just be that the world would continue existing forever as a dark world in which there are a few select group of human beings alive, and maybe even some gods, that are just so strong that they are able to actually cooperate and live amongst the insatiably hungry masses of undead, pygmies that are constantly hungering for souls, which is what drove them to find the First Flame in the first place. But ignoring all that, like that's the literal decision. But again, that's not what this playthrough is about. And this is the last thing that I want to read, and we've already read it before. But I said before I thought this was the most important thing in the game in regards to summing up everything, and it is the pursuers, the description of the pursuers. Last description ever, guys. I'm sure that you've enjoyed me wandering around in circles in this place, rambling about these things, but it's pretty important to get it out there, because this sums up everything. Sorcerer Manus, Father of the Abyss, grant a fleeting will to the dark of humanity, and volley the results. So you're giving will to the darkness within humanity, the dark soul itself, and following the result. Not that important. The pursuers embody this. The will that you give the dark of humanity, the will that you see whenever you see the humanity enemies in the cavern of Manus, floating around looking for things. They feel envy, or perhaps love, and despite the inevitably trite and tragic ending, the will sees no alternative and is driven madly towards its target. I wanted this to be the last thing that I go out on, because in my playthrough that it's supposed to be exclusively about characterization, I felt this is most important, because remember what I've said about all the characters. I read through all these NPCs today to point out that all of them seem to die through some act of violence, or vanish in an act of violence, or as a consequence of violence. But they do so as a consequence usually of some form of love or desire, as this description says. It's because of envy, it's because of love, it's because of the inevitably trite and tragic endings that everyone faces, whether they are witches, whether, even Nito, for all things, because he especially represents the ending of people, whether it's the gods that are sacrificing themselves, whether it is humans themselves. We are all driven by this need to pursue love, to envy one another, to have these completely trite and trivial motivations for everything that we do in life that, despite our good intentions, despite any successes that we have, inevitably drives us to our own destruction in some way, whether it is literal, figurative, character-driven, or whatnot. So, to me, this is not really a question of whether or not you want to renew a lie, because that's what this game, is literally about. You're facing down the gods that have constructed the lie that they are gods. Like, that's not even their real name. We don't know what their real name as a species is. They're simply pygmies that hold the soul of light, and they are simply the ones that are in power at the time. Over time, it would be the inverse. The humans would actually become the gods, because the power of the gods themselves would end up fading. So, it's not exclusively about just dispelling the illusions that the gods have created. It's not about whether or not we will embrace this era of the strongest only surviving, and maybe even a reduction into a single Dark Lord God that will reign throughout all of the rest of history, a history of nothing. It's more about characterization. Do we light the fire to encounter more stories like this? Do we want more Solairs? Do we want more Sigmires? Do we want, more even fair ladies and your Gwens and whatnot? Do we want that? Or do we want to walk out the door? Do we want to leave this forever and let all that die? Although our own humanity, our own characters will continue on regardless of whether or not they're receiving power or not. It's a choice between do we let the world sink into claiming one another's humanity? And what does that mean for the world? The choice here, to me, is a choice between acknowledging or refuting. Do you believe the world will be better off with light or with dark? And the dark does not represent evil. Like, even though it's labeled bad ending in the scripts and whatnot, it's not inherently bad, and we've learned that over time. That the dark actually represents everything that's sort of tragic and noble about people. And even, like, witches and the gods have that. So, do we rekindle the lie to let the story continue? To let people continue to suffer and destroy themselves through trite, trivial reasons that lead to ultimately nothing? Or do we acknowledge the natural ending of this, embrace it, and see what happens as a result? And to me, there is only one real answer to that question. And it is to leave. Because only through violence have we seen can things actually reform and change. This will continue forever. And the stories of Solaire and Sigmire and, Kieran, Sif, Logan, Laurentius, Oscar, all of them are not really going to mean anything unless there is some significance to it. And with any good story, what drives home the meaning of the story is its ending. The fact that it is now over. So to me, the only way to honor them and the only way to honor this playthrough, to honor all of you, is to leave.
My lord, bless thy safe return. Let Carth and Frout serve your highness. We are here to serve your highness. True dark be cast upon the world. Our Lord returns.
Our Lord has returnest. A lot of people have wondered about that line. Did it mean that there used to be another Dark Lord at some point? That may be my assumption about taking in all the power of the world and reigniting actually meant something. Or maybe he was referring to something else. We really don't know. But you'll notice that there were actually 10 different serpents that we could see in that cutscene. And Kath and Frampt both, they have the same voice actor, so we're not sure which is which. But they both end up serving us, regardless of whatever decision that we happen to make. Whether we end up choosing to side with Frampt or choosing to serve with Kath, if we actually take the dark route, both of them will serve us no matter what. So even Frampt, in calling us a fool for denying rekindling the fire, once we choose to step down, acknowledges that we have actually made that decision, regardless of whatever its consequences happen to be. And as a result, chooses to side with us regardless, whatever that actually entails. Now, what actually is going to happen now, who can say? Certainly it's not going to be Dark Souls 2. Because I think it's pretty clear, I've always been of this opinion, that it's been pretty clear that within the context of Dark Souls 1, as its own story, that the dark will inevitably win. There is no cycle. There's no such thing as a cycle. The idea that the flame will continue burning regardless of our decisions in a lukewarm state until it's reignited is ridiculous. There's no such concept. Stone dragons are dead. There are no more of them. They may have never even existed in the first place. There are only drakes and wyverns left. Humanity works the way that I described. Sort of, the other souls. And since the dark will inevitably win, if we choose to walk away from the flame, since the flame no longer has anything to consume, there is no more Gwyn, since we have taken his life and absorbed all of his power into us, then that could only mean that whenever we walk away, there will be no one left to take up the mantle. Like, it doesn't matter if someone comes along and decides, I will rekindle the flame. It doesn't matter, because one, they're not strong enough. Especially not to face me, the person that actually was able to beat all the great lords and actually take upon the mantle of the Dark Lord himself. And I can only continue growing more and more powerful as time goes on, because the light continues to fade. But since the first flame no longer has anything to draw from, it either inevitably is going to go out or whatever it actually is. Maybe it's not a flame at all, maybe it's something else that's burning, and we just can't see it, or maybe it's representing something else. But maybe it will continue to exist, but it can't be used. But regardless, the light can no longer be lit. The dark has won, as far as I'm concerned. There is no concept of walking away and then a sequel propping up for seemingly no reason. So within the context of Dark Souls 1, that is an ending. Like, both choices are completely valid. You can either keep it going or just straight up end the game. And as I said, I felt like ending this is far more fitting. To me, it makes a lot more sense from a narrative standpoint. But regardless, I am glad, even though Dark Souls 2 was not as well received as good, it did improve in some ways. And you can see that in Dark Souls 3, which they are utilizing some of those concepts from, led to Bloodborne, which despite its own flaws, was also fine. Glad to see the series will continue on. Although this game, within its own context, is done.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed.
The dark sign brands the undead. And in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world.
So I not only awaited the end of the world, I actually brought it about.
This is your fate.
Because I was fated to do so. There's that rat I was talking about in my Twitch playthrough. How did it get there? It's not even a window. It's amazing. Hello, little bugs, and hello, Oscar 2. Demon on the roof, indeed. But I hope I've given all of you guys something to think about in regards to this game. Again, I wanted this game to be completely about characterization and what that actually means to me in regards to this game and in relation to the series as a whole. One of the things I was disappointed about with some of the other games is how it failed to sort of capture these ideas, which is in some ways the fault of the player as well, because it is a cooperative experience. If you don't get these same responses out of the game that I do, that I'm interpreting, it's because you're not putting forth that same amount of effort, obviously. Whether you care to, whether the game is actually eliciting it or not. That's kind of just how it works. So in making your own games, if you're a game developer, or if you're looking at the Souls games from the perspective of a fan, then I would like you to consider that what makes a game good, what makes a game memorable, like there's mechanical things. It has to be mechanically good, of course. But a lot of what actually draws people into anything is going to be their ability to engage with it. And to me, that's what made Dark Souls so great, was the ability to actually participate with the story by reading into it and making it an actual personal decision that had no good or bad connotations with it. It wasn't a good ending and an evil ending. It was simply a yes or no question to a complicated postulation. It's a philosophical sort of thing if you actually take the time to look at it from this perspective. So I hope that you guys have actually enjoyed this entire playthrough. Sad to say, it is now at an end. I might continue playing Dark Souls one day on stream or something to that extent. But that's all you're going to see from Dark Souls on this particular channel. I'm not going to be doing a New Game Plus or anything like that. Hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. But I am off to rule the Dark World in an era full of murder and pygmies. But I hope will also be full of the same stories that I loved in this game. Because just because you remove the light doesn't mean that the stories no longer exist. People will continue to live, and even in undeath will continue to be the people that they wish to be, as we've seen in this series. So, for coming along, I will see you guys next time. So long.